Flow Show. I'm Joanna Turner, Intuitive Business Mentor, and today I'm joined by the beautiful Sarah Baiada, who is also Sarah Hollins, because she's married now to her beautiful husband, and we are going to have a really awesome conversation today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I will do a proper little intro in just a second, but we know each other from our days back in Australia. We both lived, you were in Byron Bay, I was in the northern rivers of New South Wales, and I saw Sarah talk in January 2019. And I was actually able to dig out my notes from that talk because I knew I had them somewhere. I got rid of so much stuff when I came to Scotland, but I knew I had hung on to a few key pieces. And I dug them out, and I just, I will actually read a little bit of that in a moment to sort of set the scene for us. But I'll just tell you a little bit about Sarah's background, and we're going to dive in. Today, it looks like we're going to be talking about the elements of water, solar, vibrational medicine, maybe some Mary Magdalene, planetary grid work, and some other good stuff. So just to set the scene for you guys to tune in. So Sarah is a natural health practitioner, writer, teacher, and mentor. With 20 years experience in many healing modalities, Sarah has dedicated her life to helping many people access their inner world and express their wisdom, supporting people in their comprehension of life and energetic systems, which create our own reality, world, and human experience. Wow. And what I love about you, and I was so excited to have you on and dive into your work. That's one of my favourite things about this podcast, is learning about people and their work before they come on, is your breadth of experience. You have worked with thousands of people in different modalities, and you are basically now a teacher of the teachers. And I love that you have such a strong ethical stance to your work as well. And we just have a lot to learn from you. So I'm very happy for you to be here. Thank you. So
thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really love your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. And so let's start a little bit. We'll come back to about your background and your maybe some key awakening points that brought you into this work. And I love that you went headfirst into it and didn't detour like so many of us did before we got into it.
Well, since I was little, I can still remember even being 4 and just like realizing that like I knew that I was fascinated with the human body. My older sister was studying to be a podiatrist, so I was always anatomy books everywhere, constantly fascinated and looking through and trying to figure out how things are built, how things are made, what are we? And I was also raised in a Roman Catholic house in the community, and constantly getting into trouble with the priests and all the authority figures because I would ask too many questions. I got kicked out of classes a few times. Wow. Likewise with Catholic schools, all-girls Catholic school. I was always on detention for inquiring too much and having too much of a voice. I was just always fascinated with health, anything that would support the human body. It wasn't until we were in school that I realized, you have a choice of what you want to do, because you have to have a goal of like, well, I want to do this and I want to be go down this line, this type of career. I didn't realize that you actually had a choice in what you would do here. I just always had this feeling of like, and this fascination to the human body, and also, as it turned out, spirituality. I was always writing little quotes and putting them around my room, and just always trying to figure out how it seems like I was always trying to figure out, how do I get to a certain like zone or like a certain enlightenment state. Might have been the wording that was used decades ago. And so since I was 16, I've always been reading philosophy books, always reading science books, and really trying to figure out how the two come together, because I knew they weren't separate. But when I was being taught science, it was like there was something missing.
Mm-hmm.
I was really good at rope learning things that I really loved and I was passionate about, like anything scientific, and facts and being able to recall them. And then as I started going through my more awakening side, all that went out the window and I couldn't really remember that much. So basically I started kind of waking up when I was 16 and my gifts started turning back on. And then it wasn't until I was in my early 20s, after I finished studying nutritional medicine, after studying aromatherapy, remedial massage, integrative body therapies, vibrational medicines, everything that were in those courses. It wasn't until after I finished my nutritional medicine, met a guy, because I was only learning through relationships at the time, and he was a spiritual teacher and he lived in Texas, of course, and he basically it was a long distance relationship that pushed me to start exploring the other side of things. He wasn't the best teacher. He didn't really have a strong ethical side, especially with his female students, which I realized once I went over there and saw what was happening. But it did push me to figure out a whole lot of stuff. Basically, I dropped into a hellish state to see what was happening, to see how manipulation was happening, the effects that it was having on the body, on the psychological level, on the energetic level. And then I just went traveling a lot. So I went to India for 6 months, and that's where I put all of my theory into practice. I started learning how to turn myself invisible, for example, for safety.
Okay.
Because Indian men just stare at you, and if you're on a train, if you're on a bus that has holes in it, and a baby in the seat in front of you is peeing, and you're covered in piss on your feet, and you're in really uncomfortable situations, and you're stuck there for 9 hours with one toilet break, and you have an Indian man just literally staring at you, and then I would just hear, okay, you need to learn how to turn yourself invisible.
Mm-hmm.
This is your playing field. Go for it. And so the more that I could concentrate on frequencies, I could turn myself invisible and he would not see me. And then as soon as I would lose my concentration, he'd come right back.
Wow.
And so I learned how to stretch that out, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours. And so I practiced that for 6 months, basically, but so many other things along the way in that trip. That was me just throwing myself into Mother India land, and it showing me, and whenever I needed help, the funniest thing would happen. If I'd say, I need help, I'm lost, I don't know what's happening, I don't know where I am, we don't have a map, I need to get here. Mother India a dog would just appear next to me, nod, and I would just follow it, and I would literally get to where I needed to go. And traveling in your early 20s, as a Westerner through India, you learn how to, at one point, our bus got to a place, still pitch black, 5 a.m., bunch of men starting to come around you there with your bags, and I was there with a couple of my girlfriends, and they were blown away by this, but I was like, we need protection now. And then an alpha dog came out of nowhere, barked, and then a whole pack of dogs came and circulated us and sat there until the light came up.
Wow.
So it was just learning on the job. So it was just these little things. And then obviously as I came back and I was doing more work, it was practice with my clients, with my relationships, and learning on the job. I've had some really beautiful mentors along the way, but I never really found my teacher or my teachers, which I was always looking for, but they weren't there. I was told when I was in India that one of my teachers was in the mountains and they could get me to, to them. But and then their male side comes in and, it just gets a bit muddled. So then I just realized that okay, I am actually looking for a teacher and I just wasn't finding it. So, I've got my teachers in ethereal realms, and I've had a lot of guidance, and this is just kind of how I've learnt on the job. And so that's why I want to be more of a teacher for teachers now, because there's so many elements that I've learned along the way that I can pass on and help through initiations and help them having their own initiations, and I'm walking by their side, assisting when they need, when they don't know what the fuck's going on. And also lay the my biggest thing at the moment, and it has always been, but my biggest thing at the moment is I help with communication networks, and I help with communicating the unseen into the seen, because we all have the receptors, we all have the ways of translating. We've all got the mechanisms inside of ourselves, but it's always a language barrier. Mm-hmm. And so we might be associating a word with one thing, but the energetic version and the truth of it is another. And so there's a disconnection that happens within our body. So then our life force energy and our intention doesn't know which route to take. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's really important to have that discipline with your thought and get to know your body's language. And then as a practitioner, learning other people's language so that you can help them interpret and what they're experiencing and help them to feel safe within what they're experiencing, because we're really going to get more crazy experiences coming our way. Mm-hmm. And people need to be prepared to see some crazy shit.
Oh goodness. I mean, there's so many pieces of that. And relationships are here to waken us up, and I love that, you've had those experiences, mm-hmm. but we're seeing a lot of that at the moment, the shadow side, and I think that it's been so suppressed for so long. You saw it 20 years ago in the teachers and your teaching, and we're in this moment right now. We're recording on October the 3rd, the morning right after the solar eclipse, and then we're in this new moon portal, and it feels that we're in this watershed moment of life in society. All this stuff's been bubbling up. We've had all the Diddy chat and everything, and I feel like the shadow side cannot be suppressed anymore. It's just all coming out. So really, really interesting time in our history. And I love that I would say you probably started your grid work way back then as well, but maybe without realizing.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit into what's happening in the world right now in this sort of bigger context, and then we'll sort of zone in a bit more on some issues, and then did you know about your planetary grid? That's maybe two big questions in one, but where do you feel like your grid work journey started? Was it back then? Did you have any awareness? Maybe that's too much question in one go, but we'll see.
My grid work definitely started from the beginning, basically, and I've found out recently doing more astro cartography with my one of my beautiful students has turned into such a dear friend, Sophia Palmer. She's been studying it and implementing it with her students, and she's been telling me some stuff about my grid. And I grew up on my Pluto line, which is like hard. So kind of everything else seems like a breeze. There's definitely as I think I started out more with because I suppose I awakened more from a cerebral perspective. All of my gifts were in my focusing on translating my environment. I've always kind of been shown where I need to go, and if I didn't step those steps and walk that path, I kind of get my ass handed to me. So I kind of learned quickly on that when I have that feeling of, hey, you need to go here, or this needs to happen, even if it's really uncomfortable situations for me, I comprehend my dedication to my service to myself, to with Mother Earth. That's I've always gravitated more to working with earthwork, because I could always hear the stories of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And especially growing up in Australia, because there's so much contact with the ancestral lineages in the land,
Yeah.
I was able to hear what the ancestors required for that land. And I started really focusing on this in my early 20s with one of my beautiful friends, Amanda, and we would be kind of like a situation would occur and we'd have to drive inland from New South Wales for 9 hours to get somewhere. And it should take 4 hours, but it takes us 9 hours because we end up feeling this call to like, well, we need to go over there because something's happened over there. And when you're going through different lands, the land is recognizing your skill sets as well, and your medicine and its medicine, and how it can work together. So we always have the intention of like wherever we can be of service. So we would be at bus stops and these little stops along the way, and it's like, okay, well, the grid over there isn't, something bad has happened there,
Mm-hmm.
and the land is holding that experience, and I have skill sets to assist in those situations because we can help with the connection points
Mm-hmm.
and help with the trauma to keep on evolving and moving through its process, so it doesn't have to be stuck anymore.
Beautiful. It's amazing
So
you knew that.
this kind of, it works on a level. Well, yeah, it's kind of like as soon as you open up those pathways to hearing,
Mm-hmm.
You get told, you get the information, and it requires deep listening, but it also requires you to trust. Like you literally will get this feeling of like, I need to be here, not sure why, and you have to turn up.
Yeah.
And when you're there, it's like, oh, I'm talking to like sea beings who are telling me about what's happening over there with some whales, and what's happening over there with some ships when they're doing with something that they're not supposed to be doing. And it's all about bringing balance back and basically just assisting where you can be of assistance.
And in Australia, they're called song lines. What we might know, other people might know them as ley lines or dragon lines. What have you?
There's a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, go on.
With those. So like in it all, it's all very dependent on what the mob of that region, how they experience their land and their relationship with the land and their custodianship with the land.
Yeah.
So this is where it can get really muddled with like, people come over to Australia and think that they're working with ley lines, but they're actually working with, so song lines is a much more personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where there's a disassociation, because we're coming in with this feeling of like you're working on it how you would be in England, for example. But their custodianship and their relationship with the land is different, and it's accustomed to that land. So song lines is like walking the steps of the family line. It's like walking into someone's living room and going through their personal belongings.
Wow.
Whereas, so it's a different experience. I feel like the Australia is, and I hate using the word Australia when we're talking about this stuff, but the continent in that part of the world, they still have a very strong connection to their original lineage, to their original lines. as though that piece of earth fell from the sky. You know, it doesn't. It's a very different experience than from being here in Europe, in England.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I learned this by working with the ancestors in the land, because I could hear them and they were guiding me. But more importantly, with women of that beautiful heritage, who have a lineage there,
Mm-hmm.
who are essentially medicine women and going through their process. And when you're on that land, you can see very clearly the colonization process, and it's a really strong space for you to work through the colonized parts of yourself.
Mm.
And so it requires so much more deep listening in Australia, I feel, because you can't walk on men's country and do certain work. You have to go to women's country and do certain work, because everything is still a lot more intact with the star constellations, with the star lineages.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you listen, the harder the pushback is going to be as well. So if you're just about to walk on men's country, but you're very much in your female lineage, you're going to feel a big push of like, oh my God, I can't walk past this point and I'm not sure why. And if you push past that point, there are going to be safety mechanisms in place. Mm-hmm. So, for example, bugs will start coming, or thorns will start, or you're walking in areas that have a different relationship with the souls that walk that land.
Yeah, just to be really clear, I didn't understand this until I moved to the northern rivers of New South Wales. And when you say men's country, women's country, there are literally hills locally that only women should go up, and a hill, sort of small mountain, that only men are supposed to climb. And there are even signs on the pathway saying things like that. I didn't ever go up them because I didn't feel I should, or it was the right thing for me to do. But you'll get women who go, ugh, that's nonsense, I'm going anyway, who will potentially get a little slap in the face, or a larger one, for doing so.
My friend fell off a cliff.
Wow. Okay.
She literally fell off a cliff.
Right.
Yeah. So it was part of her work, and they were like, no, you have to go up there. And she's like, oh, I don't know about that. And but went up anyway. And like, yeah.
Wow.
It can be the more tuned in you are, the counter effect is just as strong.
Right. That makes sense. And I feel when you talk about that, I've been a lot of places, obviously doing a lot of this work, and I've never felt so, the land was so potent that I really had to, I mean, I always like to check in, ask permission, but I really had to go and humble myself and say, is it okay for me to be here? Can I do that? Can I do anything here? Can I be here? Can I live here? Like, really checking in with land. It makes me a little bit emotional. And I did go to a beautiful welcome to country ceremony where with Nath, and we were part of a sort of similar spiritual community, I suppose, if you call it, in northern New South Wales. And she'd organised something, and we went along with and met with elders and went through a process, and it was really beautiful. And I was so glad that I was invited to that very early in my arrival on that part of Australia. I didn't feel the same thing living in Sydney, but I also wasn't awake, or as awake as I was when I lived down there. A bit about that area specifically. I know you don't live in Byron Bay anymore. You've moved. You're now in Amsterdam. More about that part of the world, because it is a spiritual magnet, I suppose, for people. It really attracts a lot of people looking for something, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. So in Byron, and the way that the land is, so it's originating from volcano. And so the land is very fertile, but that also means that there's a lot of obsidian underneath the ground. And so when you're there, it encourages a lot of transformation. And so if the land is calling you there, that land is traditionally a healing place.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're there to heal. Usually you're not meant to live on that land.
Mm-hmm.
And so traditionally, different mob would go there at specific times in their own journey, in their own lineage, for healing. And so, and it's a very feminine space as well. But traditionally, you wouldn't actually live there. But if the land calls you there to live there and you're of service in that land, then you listen, because it comes down to your relationship with yourself and the relationship with the land and earth, because that's the strongest contract that we have here. And so because of the physical structures underneath the land, it definitely attracts a lot of healers, a lot of people wanting healing and self-healing and healing with others. And it also means that there's a lot of the unhealed aspects there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you kind of need to be aware of whenever there's any big places around the earth that people gravitate to heal. There's still a lot of unhealed aspects as well. There's a lot of magic in that region. It is absolutely stunning, and you have access to so much medicine. I'm not just talking plant medicines at all. I'm talking about the medicine of the land.
Mm.
And if you start observing nature, you'll see the medicine. You'll see the medicine in the leaves, in the way that the air hits the leaves. It pulls you into a deeper listening. And then you've got the water element there as well, which is so potent.
Mm-hmm. And
because it's the northern rivers, there's this constant flushing of water. And it can be really hard to live there because it rains so much, and like every time like the buildup of the rain coming, and then everything's like static, like a cat with like its hair up, and then the rain falls, you're like, it's being let go of it, like, and so you start to learn how to live with the cycles because they're so immediate. That's what I noticed. But just outside of you've got the beaches, but then there's so many. This might be a little bit weird, but like there's so many like ocean civilizations on the border there as well. So if you go out further, there is a lot of communication through the water from like within that region. So if you are working with water and you're working with water beings, you can have some pretty incredible experiences and some deep learnings. And it opens up different portals within yourself.
Can you speak a little bit more into that? Because we have on the podcast, water has been coming up more and more. I've been pretty obsessed with the work of Veda Austin, her work with water, and I've been called in Scotland to work with water more. And I'd just love if you could speak into that a bit more, and what you're seeing with it and those connections, whether it's in that part of the world or elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now I am running a water meditation series, so I'm all in the water zone at the moment. So I love speaking about water at the moment, but I had to do it at this specific time because it's Libra is the balance, but we're just about to go into Scorpio, and it's the unearthing of those deeper patternings that are held in those deeper waters that are running on constant loops. Like this Scorpio season is going to be pretty upheaval. There's going to be a lot of upheaval. Like things are coming from the bottom to come up to the surface, as we're already seeing. So the more that you can focus on water now, it's going to help you to go through those initiations with water, with yourself, leading into the next month or so, because this orchestrated point in time, with all this focus in this specific time period, whether it's constructed or not constructed, it doesn't matter. We're in that collective experience.
Absolutely.
So women work with water because we are the embodiment of water. We are literally working with the portal points, but it's the water that is the transmitter, the transporter, the conductor, the conduit. So when we're working with water, we're working with the being that is water, that has the ability to be literally everywhere and touch every single element all at once and be in its frequency whilst being completely dispersed and still completely connected. So working with water at this time is so important, because the lessons and the learnings that we can get by just focusing on the water within ourselves, outside, like the water is the focus at the moment, because you have to get those flows going again. Water is literally the clearer. But I was saying this in one of my talks the other day for the course. Water is the clearer, but because it is part of a cycle, because it is a cyclic element, as you're clearing, it's opening up portals and access points for new energy to come in. So as you're clearing, you're also receiving, clearing, receiving. So it's the same thing of like, we always focus on expansion, but we never focus on the contraction point. So when you get everything that you've been manifesting, there's a contraction point after it. Yeah. And so you know this. And so we need to be focusing on both.
Too much, yeah.
Yeah, you know this. So the contraction points, like when it's like really squeezed and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can go with this. And then I just think, hang on, it's contracting this hard. I'm really excited to see what happens on the other side. If I go so deep within this winter period, wow, that soul is going to be absolutely phenomenal and playful. Yeah. And so water has this ability to bring that balance and that focus into what's actually happening in this closed system that is our Earth, because we still are in a closed system. And so it opens up those passageways for us to open up our perception to realize and remember, no, we're all connected, because we are water as well as earth, as well as fire and air. We are all these parts. And so water is a massive teacher at the moment. And a lot, there's going to be a lot more focus on it, because we are moving into, we are getting lighter, which also means that our medicines will be getting lighter. So we are going to be focusing on more like vibrational medicines, frequency medicines, light therapies, all of these beautiful, more ethereal modalities. They're only going to get more focus on them, because we're getting to the point of where the patterning started much easier, and you can clear it quite efficiently and gracefully.
Yeah.
Especially because we're moving into this period of water.
Ooh. It has just felt very naturally, it's just come elevated in my consciousness, I think is the only way to put it. And I feel like it's come to people, and I love that you've been working with it specifically recently. We had a lady on talking about Atlantis, and I feel there's a connection with the ancient, there's an ancient rising of lessons to be learned. I don't know, have you felt that connection and that awareness coming through?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be very fascinated with Atlantis and Lemuria and Avalon. Like that was one of my gateways. I was whatever I could find on it. I was studying, and then I was doing a lot of meditations where I was accessing these points through time and space. And, a lot of them was actually through water and like sneak into Atlantis and like explore different things and see different things. And the same would be with embodying more of like like a Lemurian body or perception of reality through more of that consciousness, and then Avalon as well. But when you're doing that kind of work, you also need to take into consideration that if you are tapping into past lives and things like that, you might be going through some of the more not so good points in those past lives as well, because they're matching the frequency of what you're working with within your own memory bank, within your own DNA, which is translated through the crystalline structure of the water within your body. And so when you're accessing these points, you need to keep into consideration that you might be tapping into this. And like, I would have clients come in and it would get really trippy because I would like, oh, you sold me out in this life and I ended up getting things ripped from my body and tortured because of what you did, but I have to keep my cool right now and not react or do anything because I'm in a relaxing massage. And like, we're working through your problems right now and I've got my problems coming up, but that's not necessarily, we can deal with that after.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, it can bring up things. It's because the frequency of the fall of Atlantis and where we're at now, they're mimicking so well that you can access those points. And there's another aspect of that isn't really talked about. You've got Atlantis, you've got Lemurian, you've got Avalon, but Egypt was its own being in that period as well, which wasn't, and I know that can be controversial or whatever, but like, from my experience and what I've seen and witnessed and what I'm feeling, I always feel like Egypt was actually separate from Atlantis. There was a connection, and there was definitely like pyramids being worked with and like connection points to the stars and everything. But I also feel like it was hijacked and taken advantage of through Atlantis. And there's a reason why this information isn't available right now, because we're not content or within ourselves to not want everything else outside of us to fix us or to be our experience. Like, we're not evolved yet to deal with those technologies. However, those technologies are creeping in, and this is what led to the destruction of Atlantis.
Yeah, so Atlantis sort of imploded itself in a way. Can you speak a little bit as to the link to what's happening in our current time? Like, you've talked about the collapse of civilization and this fall, and I feel like there's maybe Atlantis has come up in our consciousness because there are such similarities and lessons to be bridged and learned between the two. Can you talk a little bit about what your perspective on that is?
Yeah, great question. I feel like the reason why it's coming up so much is because, like, at a very base level, we have science without a soul, or science without ethics, and a science without the comprehension of our light being, of literally our soul. So you have people making stuff without thinking of any of the consequences outside of our five senses. And so, like, there are so many guarded and like protective mechanisms in place so that we don't push it too far as a collective. But like, we are using the similar, if not the same, technology of Atlantis, but Atlantis still had more ritual to honor the self process of self-sovereignty and evolution, whereas we've been completely disconnected from or associating with our self-sovereignty and our self-awakening process. And it's because we're still being used as batteries, for example. We're still being we're still being used for a purpose, and until we pull ourselves from being necessary for that purpose, we're still going to be used for that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of similarities between the two. Like we have quartz throughout all of our technology. That's how they communicated information in Atlantis. Their computer systems looked more like Tony Stark situation, like more lights and like holographics and all this kind of stuff. And we're not actually there yet, but it comes down to like we have different intentions for our science in a broad sense and our technology. They still had the memory of themselves was still a little bit close to the surface. And they reached a point where it was going to have a cataclysmic effect on the earth. And because if you have no comprehension of how the earth is regarded and necessary for the balance with its brothers and sisters, the different planetary bodies and all the other aspects of our solar system, it basically just hit a point where the balance couldn't come back. And we're not there yet.
Good.
We're not there yet.
Can you speak a little bit more about how we're used as batteries? I get the concept, but there might be some people that are like, wait, what did you just say? How do you feel like that? How can, like, us on an individual level, how does that affect us?
I mean, the most obvious ways that we're being used as batteries at the moment is like, so basically, we are a currency. We're a kind of currency of energy. We're a currency of light. And that light and that currency can be traded and can be used. And so, like, from a very physical perspective, our contracts, and I love going into all contract stuff, but I'll try and keep it like straight here. But you know, when we're born, we're contracted into a binding contract with the overarching system, with the planet at the moment, and then our name's in capital letters, so we're a dead entity. And if you haven't looked into this stuff, I highly recommend looking into this stuff because it might open up some doors for you to understand, well, where is my energy being placed? Is it placed outside of myself, or am I actually in my body? Am I in my embodiment?
Yeah. So that's your birth certificate, right? You're talking about.
Yeah, that's your birth certificate, which is also necessary to play until it's not necessary. And contract into that specific world. But there are so many other worlds playing out in this world as well. And so when we are being kind of used as batteries, our thought processes, now our time is a currency that is being used. And so like how much time we're looking at our screens, it's actually absorbing our energy and our time. So these are just more ways that parts of our light and parts of us are being siphoned. You can also set up contracts so that's not necessarily happening, and you have more empowerment in your process of communication with the world. Which, as you're waking up, can be really difficult because you're like, this is so conflicting. It's like, yes, but we have the ability to hold so many worlds within ourselves and play however we choose. So when we're looking, like, our phones are a really good example. It's the external version, the external model of our internal communication network. So it's just being taken outside of us. So all of our focus is pouring into that instead of our energy and our energetics and our life force circulating within our own body and turning on our own body to work in its most optimal state.
I'm so guilty of far too much phone time. That's a real, yeah. I will just hold my hand up for that one. That's probably my worst habit, I would say now. I don't hardly drink, don't do drugs. There's so many other things, other vices. I would say that my phone is my biggest vice at the moment.
It's also your way of communication.
It is.
So
yeah,
be easy on yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in my current situation, it is so much access to community. It's to people that think the same way as me. It's, my business. So there is a lot within it, I think, that's good. But and I've also had to I've been really strict with myself the last probably maybe year, because I was going down so many rabbit holes about this stuff. And I was like, I have to stop. I can't be. I did feel like it was consuming me. All of those videos, my energy, my time, all the research I was doing. I think it was important. I think it was good to know stuff. It was good to be clued in about things, but I had to cut it off. I had to say, you cannot watch every single video that is put on Telegram. Like it's not good for you. So I really had to be strict with myself. But I'm sure there's a few other people that can identify with that. Okay, so back to
I can't
back to and interesting. So I did a little contract with myself, just as an example, when the whole pandemic thing was happening. And the mask thing happened. I made a little contract, and I just said that is not in my field. It's not my life. It's not something I do. It doesn't affect me. And I just made that decision with myself and my contract, and I've never worn one. And I've flown and I've traveled and I've done it, and I've not had to. And I feel like that was me making a little contract with the world and my version of the world, and I just said that's not part of my life. And it hasn't been. So, and it's in my belief system that has not hurt or harmed anybody either. So, that was a contract I made, and I'm proud of it, and I've stuck to it. But can you talk a bit more about the contracts we can make and how we can maybe break them if we don't like the contracts we've made, or set up new ones?
Well, I mean, like any contracts and specifically, like more like energetic or like real physical, or like
I don't think now is the time to go too deep into the like birth certificate piece. I do think it's a whole area. I think you would need a whole nother podcast or episode on it. It is a rabbit hole. When you find out what really goes on, and that they are literally traded and whatnot, without really consent. Which I find there's no informed consent going on about that, and I think that's a tricky thing. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But we'll try and stay far off track with this.
I mean, informed consent is also a really good one. But like you go into wordplay with that. Like this is why like we have to let go of the disassociation with our words and comprehending that our words are spells, because they are presenting something like, hey, you should, they're saying one word, but it's representing something very different. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing situation a lot of the time, because their intention isn't serving you. It's not serving your intention. It's not serving your self-sovereignty. So like informed consent it's such a psychological game, and that's why you need to be able to hear that your body's impulse, your water's going, they're saying something that sounds positive to your ears, like you want to hear, but the intention behind it is very different. So which you need to be aware of that. And so that's what a lot of contracts are at the moment, and that's what we're breaking breaking through. So like the strongest currency I feel we have on this planet right now is integrity and honesty. And obviously a lot of people can't be completely honest with a lot of the truth just yet, because the stage has only just started being ready for that.
Yeah.
And it's a process.
It really is. And it's been so interesting to watch over the last 4 years, because there's such a massive cognitive dissonance with people that just don't want to see what's right in front of them. And I find that quite hard. And it's been a lesson for me that it's not up to me to solve that problem for other people, because they obviously don't want to see it. So for me, around certain people or my family or whatever, I tried my best, and now I really backed off on things because I'm just like, what is the point? Yeah. They don't want to see it. They can't see it. They're not maybe supposed to see it. And it's not my responsibility or my role to make them see it. So it has been challenging in certain ways. And for instance, I was just talking to my mum about these Hurricane Helene and the flooding, and I have my opinions on it, and I don't believe it was a natural occurrence. And we were just touching on there being quartz underneath the ground, for instance, in that area, and there's lithium, and there are rich in natural resources.
Necessary resources,
that have already been contracted, and there are already all sorts of things going on with the buy up of that land and mining contracts and contracts with Tesla and all this kind of stuff. And
smart cities.
And I was like, I don't think this is has been a natural occurrence. And then I've seen all sorts of other things, and my mum, all these people have died. Oh my goodness, it couldn't possibly. Oh, you don't say that. Don't say that. That's a terrible thing to say. And I'm like, I know, but you are a nice person and would not do something like that. But I was trying to, I'm like, but there are people out there who are not nice people, Mum, and that they would not care if 1,000 people die. They don't care if 2,000 people die. It's all about money and power. But I would love if you wanted to speak a little bit about that. And I've just been, as we're talking, I have this vision, and we talked a little bit about the link. A similar thing happened in that Northern Rivers, Lismore area a few years ago. Can you just, what are you seeing? What do you see? But as I'm seeing that in this water, I just keep thinking that this is the collapse. This is the collapse of civilization, and it's the flooding and the water and the link to Atlantis. And I don't know. I'm like, there's pieces that I'm trying to connect to my brain right now that I'm not sure if I'm quite getting there. But anyway, do you know what I'm trying to ask you?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that this stuff has been actually happening where there's intervention in places where there are resources, and it has been happening for decades upon decades upon decades. It's just that we're hearing about it now, and we have more vision and more insight and more ability to communicate across worlds, across continents, to see the lead ups, and it's all being recorded. So we are seeing more of the lead up, and so we're gaining more evidence of intention. And it can be really hard for people to talk about this stuff with people that still view any kind of governance as a savior, or as any kind of governance as their mum and dad.
Right.
And so if they haven't broke through that glass ceiling within themselves of putting that trust and that responsibility back into themselves, then they're not going to assume that life can it can just be collateral damage. And like and honestly, every single person on this planet is on their own evolutionary journey, and that also needs to be respected. At the same time, sometimes you're here just to lay a whole bunch of seeds and walk away for them to blossom in their own environment, because you don't know what that environment is going to feed, or where those seeds are going to spread within their own environment. It's that thing of like, you could be telling your mom this thing and they'll be like, oh yeah, whatever, but then like 2 weeks later you're like, do you know what I heard? That this and this, and they're like, you're like, oh really?
She won't listen to me, but if the Daily Mail says it, that's like a trashy UK newspaper. If it tells her, then it's true. So it's funny,
the information's getting there.
But it's funny, actually, some of the things she'll be like, oh, did you hear about this? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been telling you that for years, Mum. But she can't hear it from me, and that's absolutely fine. I'm okay with that. But yeah, so for me now, I was like, right, let me just do a podcast, and if people choose to listen, amazing, and if they don't, then I'm not forcing them to.
Yeah. And so, it's having that respect for everyone's path and their own evolution. But yeah, like I was in Byron I was living in Byron for that period where it all got where there was the flooding, and it was such an eerie night when it was all happening. No one in that region slept that night. We all could. It was the longest unnatural storm I've ever experienced in my entire life. And the sounds that were coming from the clouds were like sounds I had never heard before. And one of my beautiful friends, Sarah, she described it as, she's basically a walking fairy that works with bees and flowers and honey and the most incredible human ever. And she described it as like, it felt like a beam of light, like a beam of frequency hitting, like it sounded like metal sheets shaking in the air all night.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, actually that's exactly what it sounded like. Like my dad's a metal sheet worker. Like I know the sound very fucking well. Like that's exactly what that sound was. It just didn't sound normal, and it didn't stop. The storm just kept going, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And it was like, this isn't normal. And then obviously many people woke up to water around their beds. We were so fortunate that our house didn't get flooded, but my neighbor's house got flooded because of the way that the hill was built. The water went off, and we were basically on an island. Well, not really an island. We were on a hill. We were elevated, but all around us had risen. And then you go into town, and it's all cash. No one has cash anymore, and so it's all IOUs with the stores. And I saw the miraculousness of the whole community coming together. I saw news reporters coming in, documenting others. But what I saw happen the most was actually after the morning of the big first flood, of the community coming together, of the community supporting each other, where a lot of the stores and like food stores were like had like IOU systems because no one had any cash, because they're trying to phase that out. But obviously it's extraordinarily important because when there's instances like this, they're lining up for petrol, really figuring out what resources you had and how they can be distributed through the community. I remember I took over like 8 big baskets of like kids' clothes. I started helping with the pregnancy, birth and beyond charity, the group in Mullum, of basically just trying to, for anyone that had lost everything or needed anything, there was support networks already in place, and the natural leaders of the community just led. So majority of the rescues that were happening in the middle of the night was from a yoga teacher from her her big table with all of these satellite phones and walkie-talkies. Thank goodness that a few people had Starlight link connection, and so they were able to make a lot of rescues through this. And thank goodness for people like Chris Hemsworth that paid for helicopters to come in, because the community, the government bodies didn't come in till at least 10 days after. They came in for promotional shots beforehand, which was all recorded because there's so many instances in that region. So they had a lot of like people come up for promo shots of the military and the government and the army coming in to help. But they were just promotional marketing. And then like just across the road, there's people giving out food, and like there was no it was laughable how ridiculous it was and how it was recorded and shared around, because we have these things called social media. So I saw firsthand what happened, but what's happening in the US right now, they're stopping civilian helicopters. They're not letting people get rid of any debris. They have to keep it at the front of their house, and FEMA will come through over the next year and pick it up. So you're seeing the natural disconnections within governments and councils, and these are all the things that people assume would be taken care of. But when push comes to shove and you're in it, you realize that they're not helping. And, you know, we saw a lot of crazy stuff, like the government would started giving grants to all of these communities, groups that were helping. But the biggest group was Indigenous female-led group, and they didn't see a cent. They didn't get anything. So you do start to see the
like a favoritism.
You do start to see the realness.
I was
of the
stunned
situation.
by that. You know, looking out, the floods happened just after I'd left the region and moved back to Scotland. When I was still tuned in, my friends were reporting things, you know, having lost their homes and were hiding in their barns. And, you know, I had a girl I know sort of had her family of, I think, 3 or 4 kids living in a barn for months because they'd lost their home. And there was a lot of loss and destruction. And the rescue teams, like you were saying, it was the civilians. It's, you know, young lads in fishing boats, on surfboards, on jet skis, you know, their own thing, and, you know, paying for helicopters, civilian stuff, not the authorities you would expect to help you. And that one of the beautiful things makes me sort of tear up is that community that comes together. That's what, at the end of the day, is important. I think it brings out the absolute best in humanity. I mean, it takes sometimes like the absolute worst things in the world to happen to bring out the best in some people. And I think we maybe mentioned before we started recording, but I just immediately brought back memories of that, and because it seemed like such a parallel to what's happening now. It's
it very much is. And you have to look at the whole story. You have to look at motives, you have to look at intention. What's that land for? And is it a community that is pushing back a lot? So Mullumbimby is a community that pushes back quite a lot. They were trying to stop certain network systems from being put up in the region, specifically in the middle of the town. And whilst the town was still flooded, certain companies came in and put those networks up whilst people were still being rescued. You've got to look at the priorities, and like it's so obvious when you're in it. But if you are disassociated from it and you're not in the space and you don't see it, you're just like what? Why? Why would you do this? Why do this? But yeah, it's absolutely devastating, and of course these things will keep happening, and you have to just keep challenging the narrative. And I have a general rule: if all of the media and they're telling you to look one way, I look the complete opposite direction, because we're still playing in a dualistic reality, and they have to abide to the rules of this universe. And so if you comprehend those rules and those natural guidelines of nature, even if it's natural or synthetic, it still plays in the same realm.
Yeah.
It's a dualistic reality. They're telling you look one way, you look the other way. And see what's actually.
I was just thinking Asheville is a very spiritual community as well. And it's a bit like Byron, how it is a healing place, attracts all the spiritual light workers, and they have been doing a lot of pushback, especially around mining in the area and things like that. So it's just a very similar story, and they play the same cards that they have, and it's devastating to see the results of what's happened. Yeah. Okay. So we're in crazy times at the moment, as we have just discussed. What else do you see happening at the moment? What do you think? Where is this all going?
Where is it all going? I think that's such a soul question that can be answered over lifetimes. I feel like we're headed in a direction of, look at the way they're labeling everything in our future. One world, unity, but it's outside of the self. So with all of that beautiful logic we have of this universe, well, then it is leading to unity within ourselves and with each other. But we have to choose, and we get to choose if that process is going to happen through us,
right,
and from us, or to us. So I've thought this for so long. There's a reason why so many people are here with eyes to see. And it's such a big transition. And I kind of see it like our Earth is just moving through these giant waves, these big cosmic waves, cascading from all kind of directions. And we're just like, we are literally going through these waves of change. And the biggest ones are supposed to be between like 2020 and 2030. And so we're only just getting to the middle. It feels like it's a time where we actually get to choose how we want to play this out. But it's also a time where we realize just how much support there is for us to step into ourselves, and for us to do, to figure it out for ourselves, to not be told what it is, and for us to feel into and have our own expression of what it is. We're still in this giant cloud of confusion around this planet and within this planet. And it's so psychologically based, which only shows me more and more just how much it's important to have discipline of your thoughts, and how much we can actually create here through our intention and our ability to work with ourselves. Like, everything's getting lighter, and they have to try so hard and so obvious to implant distraction points. Right now, we've just seen the Paris Olympics, and now you've got Katy Perry and all this stuff. They're all external representations of the natural currents that are happening through our planet and its natural process. So this is the time where the feminine stands up,
Yeah.
but we also need the masculine to be standing up at the same time because they're not separate. So, I mean, they're telling you everything of what's happening. You just need to stop looking at the synthetic light of it and start feeling the real light.
What did you make of the Olympics?
Of
like,
happening.
I watched maybe 10 minutes of that opening ceremony, and I was like freaked out. I was like, this is... Because normally I'm like it's like playing like a game of like how many symbolic things can we but even in mine I was like, that looks like death on a horse. I'm like, that doesn't look and then I'm like, wait a minute, are those, is that a horned something, you know? I don't know. What was your take on that? I know it's a bit past, but
well, I'm on similar land because I'm in Amsterdam right now, so I'm only a few hours away. I work with portals, and I can feel when things are opening and closing, when it's a forced experience or when it's a galactically bound experience. So the couple of days leading up to the Olympics, there was a lot of things open. It was literally like I was just about to leave the house and I just heard like, if you don't need to leave the house, you don't leave the house right now. Like it's going to be chaos. It's going to be chaotic and it's going to take a lot of energy just to like stay in your lane. It felt like there's too many unknown variables, but they weren't aligned portals with the natural world. It felt like, it's gonna sound weird, but like grey white. Like it felt like hijacked portals, basically. So that's why I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. So I sat and watched the whole thing with my family, and literally every 5 minutes, 2 minutes, like, what? No, that's so obvious. What? But I was constantly monitoring because like I do land work, so I can feel the currency of energy running through the land, and when things are getting diverted, when energy is getting diverted and things like that. And it seems like I'm going to be really honest right now. Like, it was a failed attempt. It felt like they were trying so hard to implant seeds into the subconscious.
Oh, yeah.
That I felt myself laughing at it, to be honest. I'm just like, nah, this is too obvious. It's too in your face. But then you also need to look at where else in the world are they doing it at similar times in the same kind of brackets of like the frequency of the portals. So then you can kind of like, well, if they're trying to ground it here and here, then they're using this line. Yeah. Let's have a conversation with the natural guardians and ancestors of that path. And it seems like it's so obvious now.
I actually said to a few people, I said, you couldn't pay me to go to the Olympics in Paris right now. There is no... Oh, I felt physically repelled from it.
No, I wouldn't have gone.
I do enjoy watching bits and pieces and some of the athletics. I didn't totally, what's the word, avoid all of it. But yeah, there's something real creepy going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I've always had this very, very strong saying that I say with my students and my clients, especially when they start opening up and seeing things that they haven't seen before. It's like, okay, the bigger the thing and the bigger the teeth just shows how little power it actually has. So its only way of winning you over is for it to convince you that it's more powerful. So the general rule is the more obvious it is and the more bigger the teeth and the gruesomer it looks, because that's what we're trained with horror shows and horror movies and everything. The bigger it is, then it actually has very little power. It's in a Buffy episode. I grew up with Buffy on rotation, and there is an episode where there's this big big scary voices, and like it's this like build up of all of this hysteria of like fear, and then when it comes down to it, it's just this like little being saying like fear me, worship me, and it's just like ugh, whatever. And that's how we need to remember that we are bigger than all this shit that is transpiring, and it's showing us just how much showing us how much we actually are, and it's showing us so much more about ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, some of it,
you have to be able to
it's definitely laughable.
Laugh at this shit as well.
Just sort of, I'm aware of your time, but I just want to this is one last piece I just wanted to ask you a little bit about. You've made a big move with your family from Australia to Amsterdam. Can you tell me a little bit about that move and why you felt so called to do that?
Well, we came out of the many years of lockdown in Australia, where we weren't allowed to travel, and we just we knew that we needed to, like, for my husband's work, we needed to be in the Northern Hemisphere because most of his business takes place in the Northern Hemisphere time zone, and Australia just doesn't have the same kind of industry. And so for me personally, I knew that I needed to step more into my own lineage work. I had already done so much work with that continent of Australia, and I have been training women to take over, to be ears to hear while I was gone. So basically it was a massive death of myself with the Southern Hemisphere. I had to go because my work required me to be in the Northern Hemisphere, because there was other people in my unit that were there, and like I will forever be disconnected or separated on different continents from people from my soul family because we're positioned perfectly, like, and we might not see each other or speak to each other for years, but as soon as there's one little contact, we're like, we've literally been working together the entire time. So before I left, which like I'm certain people listening to this would know what I'm talking about. But before I left, I held one last practitioner training called Holistic Embodiment in Byron Bay, and I passed on one of my grounding meditations, and I taught them how to do it. And within that, it helped activate them to hear more ancestral conversation and turn on more of the fairy conversations, the element conversations. So I could leave my post, so to speak. Before I left, I had 6 months of beings here connecting with me and saying, we're calling you over. Don't worry, we'll take care of you. They're in the ocean. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's great. I still don't know why I have to move, but I trust the process. And so I said my goodbyes. I spent 6 months clearing out an entire life with children.
Wow.
And we came over with 4 bags, 4 suitcases, and started from scratch. So we've just finished our first year here, which was very difficult to, the first year moving is insane, but also to set up children as well and get into the flow of it. First time having a winter ever in my life. Not that crash hot about it, but I'm learning the lessons I need to learn from it, and I'm sure I'll embrace it at some point. But I love the sun. And so, like, I'm with the water, learning the elements here. I'm connecting with, like, the flowers have been my friends. I'm talking to flowers. I've been making essences, but soon after we landed here, we went to the ocean And my little son, his face just lit up like, oh my God, they've got one of these here as well. Because like he loves Byron because of the ocean. He just lit up, and he's like, he couldn't talk or anything, but you could just hear him being like, they've got one of these. And I got into the ocean, and then I heard the spirits, the beings that I was already working with, and they're like, oh, you're here. And they welcomed me here and told me like, you came from the Red Rock. Welcome to the land of the air and water, like the ocean. So getting me acquainted with the frequency of the water from this ocean and everything that it touches here. So yeah, and I haven't actually been back since, but I needed to go through a period of my body getting adjusted to the elements, and like, yeah, I've just literally been talking to flowers, and that's why winter was really hard as well, because all of the energy and all the communication goes down into the roots, and so I was like, I've got no friends. I've got no one to talk to through the day, besides my kids and my husband. But then when it started coming up with that first snowdrop, and I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful, and like literally started crying. Yeah. And then I started realizing, all I've learnt is plants from Europe, from England, because all of our nutrition and everything, I learned Bach flowers. Like I know all of these beings already from the textbooks and everything, and now I get to really experience you. So I've had some pretty incredible experiences, with the flowers, and it's only getting stronger, and I'm so excited to start making products again soon, and like these vibrational medicines, because they're quite potent. And I'm having a lot of fun learning here, because it seems less harsh, and it just seems like there's less of a barrier, because I have like, this is my bloodline is from Europe, or Malta, but yeah, so from the water. And there's a birthplace of a lot of the psychological warfare that's currently playing out in civilization. It is one of the birthplaces, so that intertwines with all of the Magdalene stuff, all of the Templar stuff, reaching through different family lines, and because it's a really important thing to know that your bloodline is connected to the land that your family has walked and been custodianship of, which means you have birthright to work, to work with those grids, which literally knocks out anything else, because it's in its natural form.
They were the lockdowns that, not maybe lockdowns, but the requirements and things. They went real hard on it, which I thought was interesting. There were a few places that went really hard. I can't think of the word, but very draconian, I suppose.
Purpose of that. Well, it hit specific bloodlines, really specifically. And so if you're looking at the frequency of the interacting force that was being imposed and being forced into acceptance, let's just say a crooked crown. So that was psychologically trying to be implanted, and then physically implanted. And so, like, I've worked with a lot of people who have had a lot of injury from things as well, just read between the lines. And so I got to actually learn the energetic imprint, how it was actually working, how it targeted specific bloodlines and starlight connections as well. And I'm holding on to a lot of information that I'm not ready, or it's not meant to be taught just yet, but it will be. But there's specific star lines that it affected more than others. And so if you look at where the mandates were the strongest, you can kind of start to see which ancestral star lineages, it had the biggest effect.
Interesting. Very interesting. That might be another kettle of fish. But if anyone watched, there was one of the latest Bond movies that came out around that time. I was watching it. I don't know if you saw it, but they were killing specific people, but the weapon was only activating certain DNA, and those people were dropping, and so they'd be at a party and they could activate something and like it would target the people they wanted. And I was watching it with my jaw on the floor, like, yeah, it was quite an eye-opening movie for me. Yeah, that was a bit much. Where one of my last couple of questions, and we'll wrap this up in a minute because I really appreciate. You mentioned very briefly the Magdalene piece, and I know that you went on a bit of a Magdalene adventure when you first came to Europe. And it's been coming up a lot in my discussions and in my field. What do you think the Magdalene activation at the moment, I suppose is the word, is? What role is that playing in all of the stuff we've discussed today?
Well, if you look at it from the perspective of the psychological warfare that's playing out right now, the seed of this civilization that it's been birthed from, it's the inversion of the masculine and feminine. You've got the Christ consciousness, and then you've got the Sophia consciousness with the Joshua and Magdalene as the pinpoints, so to speak, so using those codes to replicate the inversion through the consciousness of our psychological makeup and collective. So if you're trying to work with contracts, you're trying to work with patterns, and you're working with deprogramming, colonization, they're doing it from on the backbone, on a hijacked perspective. They're using those codes to spread through the consciousness. I know this might be really out there, but this is quite advanced kind of ways of comprehending it. The reason why they work with those codes is because they are so the 2,000 years ago when that activation had happened, it produced the seeds for the next structures of our soul's expression here, the templates that we would be working from when you merge from a soul into a physical body. And so those were manipulated over time, and throughout the centuries, there's been intervention points where our civilization and our bloodlines are interacting with more artificial code, but the more real you can make it, the easier it is for the body to accept it as real and then continue to replicate it. So over time, if you continuously just hack away at it, you end up with quite an artificial code that looks like original code, but the intention behind it is different, and it can be manipulated because it doesn't have those structural basis in place for the body to reject it. So when you're looking at synthetic light, which is very much used throughout our world when we create, synthetic light will always go in a straight line. And our natural light goes in waves. This is a snake planet. This is a water planet. We weave, we wave. That's what we do. Now, when you're trying to produce a synthetic version of that, you can make it look like a wave. But if you really zoom in, it's all very, very, very small straight lines put together. And so when you're doing energetic work You need to be aware of this kind of stuff. You need to be able to pinpoint that's not real. That's not meant to be there. That's why there's a block in the system, because the flow can't get through. And the more we continue to wake up, and the more that we're waking up within our own bodies, it's much more easier to see the shards and to see where there's manipulation in our templates, in our codes.
I think I might have to listen to it twice. And I think for people, maybe they don't quite get it. That's okay. It's a lot to take in, but I think your soul can hear it. And there's the piece of you that needs to hear it, and some part of it needs to land, will land. I remember one of the beautiful things you said when I did go to your talk all those years ago. You said, my whole talk is an activation. Every word is an activation. And I feel like that's hopefully what the podcast is, what this episode is. And even if people don't grasp everything we've said, some of it has been a little coded. We haven't, fully maybe said the words sometimes. You'll get the energetic of what we're trying to say, even if some of it doesn't land as a comprehension as such. And sometimes you need to hear these things in different ways, and a little piece of the puzzle drops and then another piece of it drops, and like, wait a second, oh, I get that now, and it all kind of weaves together. So I just trust that whoever needs to hear it, whatever, they get exactly what they need from the conversation and from your wisdom. And I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us. Thank you so much.
Sorry, just one more little thing. Like, it's that thing that so many people... Well, it's that thing that we're experiencing now, that so many people have just woken up to some realizations over the last couple of years. Like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so, when I'm teaching and when I'm doing my talks and doing stuff, like I'm intentionally connecting the visualization and every kind of aspect that I can possibly bring in, so that you can hear it in whatever language that you speak. And that's what storytellers do. And that's why, like, I always work better when I'm listening to a teacher in front of me or on a screen or however. But like, compare that to like a book or me having to read or something. Like, I love speaking. I love hearing from storytellers, because they're whispering the stars to you and using language that and connecting the dots.
You're in a beautiful sweater with like big red flowers. I think it's roses on it. And so even that is bringing the energy through. And before we got on the call, I was like, I feel the call to put some rose. I put frankincense, rose, and some lavender on. And so even all these little pieces of the puzzle, whether it's the beautiful color in your sweater and the essential oils, and I'm using my tuning fork before I even, open this conversation in my little space, and I know you would, set an intention as well. And it's all of these, right? Exactly. I've got all the bits. I pulled a card, I'm like, all of the things. I'm like, just sat and just was like, right, what's this going to be? And so, all of these different pieces of what we bring into this, and it weaves a bigger story and something through it. So I really appreciate that. If people are intrigued and looking to connect more with you and your beautiful wisdom, obviously I'll share in the show notes, but what are the best places to find you? And at the moment you've got your water meditations happening, so just tell us a little bit about that, and that'd be great.
So I've started doing meditations that are they're quite big activations, but it's helping you to activate those elements within yourself and those elements within your communication to the outside world. So you're learning with your environment. So we've done solar, we did that through Leo season. We're doing water, which is getting us ready for Scorpio season. And then I have quite a few others planned after it. So they're 4-week series, and they're going through different elements, and it's helping you to play with them, learn with them, expand with them, and connect you to you, and so you can walk easier on your path. I've seen some incredible things so far. After the first solar meditation, I was getting all of these messages from my students of, hey, I can smell more, and I don't know why. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because now I'm smelling people more who are wearing artificial things, but I'm also smelling the roses more. And now, like, I'm starting to realize, like, I follow this amazing neuroscientist, and he put up this thing of, like, the antennas within your senses. Basically, from his work, I could see how, like, the light therapy, which was our solar light, and our connection with true solar light and our soul light, turning that up and turning that on was activating the antennas in the senses. So people were smelling more, seeing more, hearing more, feeling more. We did for the first water meditation was working with droplets coming up from moss underneath your feet and having this big clearing experience. But the aim is to turn on your receptors more, so you're more receptive, can get your information for yourself, because we all can. So working with the energetic system and the elements that we are in our nature, we already have everything we need. We just don't have it activated, and we can do that. So yeah, people are, looking for a house for a year, and all of a sudden it's come through and the flow is there, and like things are happening really quickly because everything is supporting rapid shifts right now. We just have to be supported to do that. So I've also opened up one-on-ones where it's I've called it energetic alignment. So if you have more specific things that you just are having trouble shifting, or wanting to explore yourself a little bit more, then I've purposely setting up these libraries of meditation series and more one-on-one work.
People can still get the solar, they can still jump in. Great. Awesome. Because that, it might just be, and the card, I've gotten rid of most of my card decks. I've only got one left, and it's the Akashic one, because that's what I work with most, and it's like literally the only one left. But the card I pulled was this one. I'm just showing it, the light of the world, and the words were so it was all about activating the light within, and I was like, that, of course that's the card I pulled for this chat, of course it is. And I don't normally even pull them, so I just thought that was kind of interesting that that's been part of the conversation. But yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure this has got some cogs turning and maybe some rabbit holes for people to go down and open their minds a little bit. So I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.